All right, in this tutorial, we are going to take the column that we modeled and UV unwrapped, and we're going to run it through Substance Painter to create a unique set of textures for that. So what we'll need is our column project. Let's make sure that we have our Scene Explorer open, Tools, Scene Explorer. All right, and so you'll see looking at mine that mine already has two things. It has a column high poly and a column low poly. So I'm going to go ahead and just for purposes of this demo, I'm going to delete one of them, the high poly. All right, and so this here is my low poly. You'll notice there's this weird shading because I went in here and I have this habit of putting a second edit poly on. That's because when you export out FBX files, for a while there, it was automatically triangulating your mesh, and that meant it would take every one of these nice polygons that was hiding the hidden edge, it would go ahead and put that edge in there as a solid line. And so a workaround was to put an edit poly on, and I don't really think that's necessary to know anymore. I think they actually fixed that, but let's just convert to edit poly. And so I'm going to go into element and select everything here. And I'm just going to give it one smoothing group. If you have multiples, just a clear all and then just assign one. Because all of the corner information, the change in surfaces, all of that is going to be baked into our texture. So our mesh doesn't need to have any of that. So we're going to clear all that out. Just give it all one ID. Notice when I click off it, nothing shows up because I don't have anything selected. All right, so let's go back up to edit poly. And if we go into unwrap UVW and open the UV editor, you see that I have all my UVs laid out. Now what I'm going to do here is create a unique set of UVs or a unique texture set for this model. So everything has to be UV unwrapped, right? So that's how this model is. It's already set up. Rotate poly. Now I need to give this a name. So I'm gonna give my initials BN underscore column underscore LP. Now naming your meshes inside your max file is really important because you're gonna start to have more than one version. So I'm gonna just select this name and copy it, and then I'm gonna do File, Export, Export Selected, and then I wanna go up to the same folder that I have my max file in, and I'm going to paste that name in there, and I'm going to save as a type of called Autodesk FBX and hit save. And then in this dialog, I'm going to go and say media and entertainment. I want to make sure that animation is turned off. I don't need that. I'm going to open geometry and everything else is good. So now it'll say user defined because we turned off animation. So now I hit OK. That's going to export that out. All right. So now we have our, if I hit F4 to turn off, this is our low poly. I'm going to right click on it and say clone as a copy, right? Because we're going to make changes to the mesh. So we want to make sure it's just a copy and not an instance. We'll say okay, and I changed the suffix to HP, and that stands for high poly. So let's come over here to our Scene Explorer, hide our low poly. All right, here's our high poly, and what we want to do here is we're going to go to Element, and we're going to grab everything and just hit Auto Smooth. So now this has smoothing group data. And so now all of the data on this model of all these different surface changes, that's all going to be baked into the texture for us. And so then we'll just go ahead and we'll copy this name. We'll say File, Export Selected, paste that name in there, and then in that same folder, right, save. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and we'll save our max file. And now we open Substance. So I'm going to pause the tutorial while I go ahead and load that up. Those of you with older machines, you may want to close 3ds Max and any other apps that you have running so that you can open this up. Substance is a very memory intensive program. So when it first opens, you're going to have a home screen here. It's got very useful tutorials. Substance and Substance is a whole suite of tools, right? There's Substance Painter, which takes materials and applies them. There's also Designer where you can go in and create your own materials. But that Designer, while being a very amazing and robust tool, is far outside the scope of this class. So I'm going to hit close here. So you have your primary windows, your asset windows, your viewports, and then your working menus over here. So let's just get started. Say File, New, and we're going to select a template. Now mine's defaulting to Unreal Engine 4 because I've used this program before. You just want to go in and find that Unreal Engine 4. You want document resolution at 2048, and then you're going to select the file. So when you go to Substance and you go to bring in your model, it's really important to remember that the version that you're always going to be bringing in is always going to be the LP, the low poly. Think low poly, that's the game resolution version. That's the version you want to see visible inside your 3D viewports all the time. It's really just remember that. Do not bring in your high poly. So let's say open. I'm going to hit OK. And now here in my 3D viewport, you see there's my model. Remember when we removed the smoothing groups? And then on the right, I'm going to scroll my middle mouse button. And you see there's our UV layout. But what's interesting is you don't see it just as a wireframe. You actually see it with a material applied to it. If I hold Alt and click in this viewport, I can Alt and left click allows you to orbit. All right. So here we have our model. First thing we need to do after we bring it in is go to texture set settings, and my layout may be different. Let's do just to make sure. Yeah, everything should be as default here. And if it isn't, well, let me know and I can tell you where these things are at. All right, we want texture set settings. Notice I come to the edge of the menus and I can drag it down. So here in texture set settings, you want to set your size, your resolution, which we're going to do 2K, so that's 2048. And what we need to create are called mesh maps. And so it's a series of images, all these different ones here, and they're based on the surface data of the model. And so we're going to click Bake Mesh Maps, and this brings us into this viewer. So this is a big change from previous versions of Substance. When you go to watch older tutorials, you're going to see a very different setup, right? This full 3D view is very different, right? And you can turn it off. Actually, there's an option to turn that off. Well, this is pretty new to me too. So first thing to notice here under Mesh Map settings is output size. You can change that to 2048 so it matches. All right, and then we go through and now we set our high poly, right? Now, if you don't have a high poly, you could always just click use low poly and just utilize that. But we wanna try and do this right. So we're gonna get that normal data, the corner, the directional shifts from the mesh. So we're gonna click on the little page here, and we're gonna navigate and find our HP, our high poly, and say open. Now you can see how Substance goes through and makes this little cage around everything. And now we're just going to go ahead and bake it. Let's see what we get. There we go. So now we're going to click return to painting mode. And so now if I hold Alt and drag, you can see how our model, you see how it has all of that data in there? The mesh didn't change at all, but what did change is we now have these series of maps, these images. And so now all those are informing the surface of this mesh. So let's go over to layers here. And we can now come over and grab something like this concrete and just drop it into the layer menu, and it's going to apply that concrete to our model. Now, if you hold shift and your right mouse button, you can change where the light is. And what we're doing is we're changing the the high dynamic range image that's generating the light data. So we can get rid of that. There's other options we could go in here and plug in. Right, and these could be good, right? Some of them, though, aren't going to be the greatest. You see how you get this big seam in there, right? That's no good. Nobody wants that. They'll have properties, so you could change. Like if we do, let's change the projection to triplanar projection. Oh boy, that's no good either. Turn that off. So look, concrete bear, we're not going to use that. So we could use one of these. There's also, if we click the next one, this is called smart materials. And so these are basic materials that are layered on top of themselves. So like I've gone through and I've actually created some stylized ones. They kind of have this sort of gradient action happening here and there. They don't always work on everything though. There's also ones you could download online from Substance Share, right? So this one has this kind of metal, dirty metal look on it. Now in our case, what we're doing here is we're making a column that's going to go in our Coliseum. So we can go ahead and find one that matches for that. Check it out. That one's pumpkin. Let's get rid of that. So we just want to find something that's going to look like an actual column, right? Eh, don't really like that. Some of that shading's weird. Creature tooth. All right, let's get real here though. Let's just find, I'm going to go back to just basic materials. I'm going to put this concrete dusty on it. There we go. I like that. I'm going to bake this out. Now you may not have the exact same ones as me. You could just use any of the defaults that are there. And so in its most basic form, let's hit save before we do anything else. And we're going to go to our documents. Give me a second here. Navigate to the right spot. I'm just going to call it BN column and hit save. All right. So now I have this here. I like how this texture looks. I'm just going to do File, Export Textures, and then I just need to specify the directory by clicking on it. Come up here, go to Scenes, and select that folder. And then I'm going to select an output template. Mine is defaulting to Unreal Engine 4. That's the one I want. And so then I'm just going to hit export, and that's going to export it out. And then you can close that. Save your project. And then if you navigate to that folder, here's my demo column. You can see that now these images are in here. If I double click on it, what happens is when you get to the edge of a UV shell, it just repeats that pixel out. That's to help with the resolution changing. But here's your column, the color, here's the normal data. And so that's the direction things are pointing. And then this is a packed map, right? So this is a series of red, green, and blue channel. Each one has its own different information in there. And we'll be plugging these into Substance to see them. But one thing we want to do is we want to change the name. So I'm just going to hit F2 to go into rename, and I'm going to change it to everything. I'm just going to leave the primary name, the BN column underscore. I'm going to change this one to base color. And you can see it says base color, but I'm going to change it to BC. You have limits inside game engines of how long names can be. And so it's good to abbreviate things and to take out extra info because Substance will default to naming it the mesh name, the material name, and then spelling out the full name. And really for something like a normal, all you need is an N. And these are very common naming conventions used throughout the game industry. And so this is a packed map. You see how it says occlusion, roughness, metallic? You can change this so it just says occlusion, and I kind of flip back and forth between doing AO for ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. And the only reason I do kind of waffle between those two different versions is sometimes people abbreviate opacity, which is transparency in a two-dimensional format. Sometimes they use just the O for that, and so AO kind of helps clear that up. But there you go. Now you have your texture for your mesh, and you will be able to bring that into Unreal when we get to that point and check it out.